Content warning. This video contains discussions and symbolic representations of racial, identity-based, and political violence. Collective vigilantism is a global phenomenon. On every continent, in both wealthy and poor countries, large groups of people use violence to enact their own versions of justice. Since the early 2010s, dozens of vigilante killings have been reported on an abandoned soccer field in South Africa, known as the Field of Death. Since 2015, hundreds of Muslims in India have been victims of violence, primarily by cow vigilantes, devout Hindus independently enforcing the beef bans implemented by the country's Hindu Nationalist Party. In recent years, high crime rates in many South American countries have led some citizens to turn to mob violence to seek justice. Why is collective vigilantism so widespread? What conditions make it more likely to happen? What needs to be done to eradicate it? To parse out the answers to these difficult questions, Professors Dara Kay of Harvard Kennedy School and Danielle F. Jung of Emory University collected detailed quantitative and qualitative data, focusing especially on two places: Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and Khayelitsha, South Africa. Their findings paint a complex picture of the nature of extrajudicial violence and draw attention to a key issue: the legitimacy of the state in the eyes of local residents. On this episode of Behind the Book, we'll learn about the context and character of current-day collective vigilantism, what distinguishes it from other kinds of political violence, and why it continues to be a major problem for countries around the world.
If we see someone steal something small, we know that he might steal something bigger than that in the future. There is a Haitian expression: if you steal an egg, you could steal a cow.
What is collective vigilantism? In the United States, collective vigilantism is commonly called lynching, and has primarily taken the form of mob violence used to terrorize Black communities and maintain a racial social order. But in the contemporary global context, collective vigilantism has a broader definition. It can take a variety of forms and may be used as a response to a range of perceived social and political problems, from managing crime to enforcing social norms.
We follow Regina Bateson's definition of vigilantism, which is the extralegal prevention, investigation, or punishment of offenses.
Professors Cohen and Jung dove into the study of collective vigilantism during their fieldwork in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, where they conducted what is believed to be the largest survey ever fielded on crime and gang governance in the city. When they found popular support for collective vigilantism, they decided to dig further, to try to understand why such horrific violence had accumulated widespread support in some communities. Cohen and Jung's research has two major components. One is a cross-national dataset, the first of its kind, that seeks to quantify the scope and scale of the problem. Sifting through hundreds of reports from the U.S. State Department, which were sourced from human rights organizations and newspaper sources, their efforts paint a vivid and disturbing picture.
First and foremost, I think it's important to say that lynching is reported all over the world, right? It's not limited to certain regions, to certain countries, to certain cultures. It's really a global phenomenon. We collected data on who is targeted for lynching and other forms of collective vigilantism. Our data there suggests that the vast majority of the targets are men. Another thing we looked at was kind of the precipitating crime. We found that the kind of largest categories for the precipitating crime were property crimes, were theft, murder, kidnapping, and rape.
As this chart demonstrates, Cohen and Jung found that reports of collective vigilantism between 1976 and 2013 appeared to have increased, though it's important to note that this trend could be attributed to what Harvard scholar Catherine Sicking calls an information paradox, in which the process of exposing harms makes them appear to be getting more severe. But Cohen and Jung wanted to know more. They wanted to better understand the relationship between governance, political legitimacy, and collective vigilantism. How does a community that already has a legal process and judicial system get to a point where mob violence seems like the most effective way to enact justice? The authors hypothesized that the prevalence of collective vigilantism had something to do with who was, or wasn't, providing basic services to the community. Basic services like trash collection, road repair, and water supply.
If you let the police come and arrest a suspected murderer, he will go to jail probably. But as you know about our justice system, he will be free very soon. That is one of the reasons why this happens. The people kill the criminal so that they are sure he doesn't come back to get his revenge.
Cohen and Jung's hypothesis departed from conventional wisdom in social science, which tends to attribute collective vigilantism to poverty and the absence of law enforcement.
We really, I think, consider and respond to three powerful conventional wisdoms about lynching and collective vigilantism. The first is that poverty is the main driver of lynching and collective vigilantism. But we were able to show that lynching is not a problem that's limited only to the poorest countries. The second conventional wisdom has to do with state capacity, right? And here the argument often goes that lynching and collective vigilantism is most likely to happen in places where the state is absent. We find some support for that argument, but we do find that lynching actually happens in a variety of governance settings, not only in the lowest capacity, most poorly governed states or pockets of states. The third relates back to the study of the United States. In the case of the US, the lynching of Black and brown people in the US was an act clearly rooted in racism, in white supremacy, and itself was an act of racial terror. But those patterns, we argue in the book, are not widely generalizable to other countries, other contexts, and to the contemporary world.
To test their hypothesis, Cohen and Jung embarked on the second component of their research, focus groups and surveys. Over the course of several years, the authors spoke with ordinary people living in two communities that had experienced collective vigilantism and related activities. The first was Khayelitsha, a township on the eastern edge of Cape Town, South Africa. In Khayelitsha, the authors surveyed 516 adult residents and found that 63% of respondents thought it might be, or definitely is, appropriate for neighbors to kill a thief as punishment. That number climbed to 75% for murderers. Cohen and Jung also found a correlation between a respondent's confidence in a well-performing government and their support or disapproval of collective vigilantism. In general, those respondents who voted for or otherwise approved of their local counselor were less likely to approve of collective vigilantism. Cohen and Jung also conducted a series of focus groups with dozens of adult participants in Port-au-Prince. From these focus groups, the authors were able to gather granular data about local people's attitudes regarding the legitimacy of local governments, and about their support or opposition to collective vigilantism. Similar to their survey in Khayelitsha, Cohen and Jung found that approval of collective vigilantism correlated with a lack of confidence in local governance and judicial systems. Those who indicated that they either might be or definitely are supportive of collective vigilantism tended to receive fewer public goods from the state, like trash collection and road repair.
What we see is that in neighborhoods that are underserved and receiving basic services from non-state actors or from no one, lynching may be most likely and most likely to be accepted.
One of the most depressing parts of the book was the census that we did of basic social services. Again, just kind of asking people, from where do you get, if anywhere, access to clean water? Are you able to have your roads repaired? We were both really surprised in some ways by what people responded, right? Because particularly in the aftermath of the 2010 earthquake, when so much money flowed into Haiti. I think we were both expecting to see that a range of actors are providing these types of services because we know the Haitian state is very weak and is not able to provide some of these basic services, but also maybe expected that more of those services would be provided by local NGOs, by international NGOs, by religious organizations, and really very few people reported receiving anything.
If this happened in my neighborhood, I would say that the neighbors have done something good. The act of collective vigilantism was for all of us. We do not need to tolerate thieves. Once a thief steals, he needs to be punished. This is good justice.
Professors Cohen and Jung's findings have profound implications for policymakers, activists, and journalists who want to curb collective vigilantism. While the authors think anti-lynching legislation is an important first step, the main solutions they offer are to ensure that states are set up to provide for the basic needs of their populations, including the consistent provision of justice and accountability.
Our findings suggest that actually something as simple as increasing the provision of basic social services, including those that have nothing to do with security whatsoever, are really essential in terms of developing legitimacy in the eyes of the public. And that's a really important first step to kind of rebuilding what has eroded.
The book is Lynching and Local Justice: Legitimacy and Accountability in Weak States, written by Dara Kay Cohen, professor of public policy at Harvard Kennedy School, and Danielle F. Jung, associate professor of political science at Emory University. It's published by Cambridge University Press. This has been Behind the Book, a production of Library and Knowledge Services at Harvard Kennedy School. Find past and future episodes of Behind the Book by subscribing to Harvard Kennedy School on YouTube, following us on Twitter at HKS Library, and visiting our website.